CEO of South Coast Aboriginal Women's Health and Wellbeing Organisation, Waminda, has slammed the federal government for failing to fund a local birthing on country service. More than $13 million was announced in the federal budget last week for a mainstream organisation to research why preterm births occur, particularly among Indigenous communities. But Faye Worner says that work has already been done in conjunction with First Nations groups in the Shoalhaven, and the money would have been better spent establishing a locally based birthing on country centre. Ms. Worner spoke to ABC reporter Ainslie Drewitt-Smith.
Look, I'm pretty underwhelmed, to be perfectly honest. I think there has been an announcement, broadly about funding for women, but there's definitely no targeted funding for First Nations women, and I think we've missed the mark completely in terms of maternity care and early childhood care and birthing on country. And, we've been lobbying for many years, but months in particular, to have some impact on this budget, knowing that we are ready to go in terms of the evidence base, in terms of our ability to, set up maternity care options for Aboriginal women on the South Coast, and we've been completely looked over.
Yeah, there has been some funding announced for childcare and also some programs that directly support sort of frontline services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. But is that quite broad? Would you like to have seen it more focused on programs like yours?
Yeah, it's incredibly broad, and and there is some mental health funding being announced, but it's also about trying to build up the capacity of actually having people who can work in the sector, and we don't have enough capacity building for people to gain qualifications and skills to actually work in the sector in the first place. The funding announcements are incredibly broad, and they're not targeted to where they need to be. We are one of the archos that are ready to go in the sector in terms of, birthing on country in particular. There is nothing in the budget about that at all, about maternity care for Aboriginal women. They've funded, the Preterm Alliance, which is a mainstream organisation, a national mainstream organisation, which is not going to meet the needs of Aboriginal women.
Okay, is that the $13.7 million to reduce preterm birth rates?
Yeah, it is. And, the thing is about, what I've read their media release, and this isn't about, being competitive with any mainstream service. The whole point is that their media release points to the fact that they need to research into why preterm birth occurs in the first place. Well, we're actually really much further along than that. So the research that we are part of, we've got incredible evidence and data around what reduces preterm birth, and we've got the evidence to reduce preterm birth by 50% in Aboriginal communities now. So we're ready to go, and we know what can have an impact for Aboriginal women and their babies today, but we don't have any funding.
Well, in terms of domestic and family violence, we've obviously heard that the funding that's been allocated is, of course, welcome. I think it's around $900 million over the next 4 years. But we've also heard from a lot of women's groups that it really just sort of scratches the surface. $900 million over 4 years just isn't enough. Is that your view as well?
Yeah, of course it is. And it might sound like a big announcement, but when you see how underfunded the sector is, and when domestic and family violence organisations and services are so underfunded now, $900 million over 4 years would not even bring services up to par. So, this is what we've got to be able to look at. We are so underfunded now in terms of that service delivery. It's a state-funded program, but as an example, Staying Home Leaving Violence program, we're doing 3 times the amount of work that we're funded for because the need is so great. So when you're talking about, a few extra $1,000 for programs that are running currently, that's not going to meet the need. And obviously the need is incredibly, it's great. So if the federal government was serious about women and serious about domestic and family violence in community, they'll actually look to do more than just bringing services to par.
Another interesting aspect of the federal budget was some $31 million over the next 5 years for a personal safety survey for First Nations women, which will be run through the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and that's supposed to be designed to record how prevalent violence facing Indigenous women and girls is. What do you make of that?
I mean, what a complete waste of money. All the federal government needs to do is to go to services on the front line now, Aboriginal community-based health organisations who are working in the community now, and consult with them, with AH&MRC in New South Wales, with NACCHO on a federal level, to be able to gain an insight, which is already there, the evidence is already there, of how prevalent domestic and family violence is for Aboriginal women and what the needs are. To have a survey run through the ABS at that level of funding, I mean, it makes me actually really quite sad.
Is it a little tone deaf, you think?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is we've been lobbying, we've been talking, we've been advocating, we've got evidence, we've got the data, we've got the stories, we've got the narratives from the women. There's, it sort of gets to a point where it feels like, what else do we have to do to be actually heard and listened to, and not be given, just some short, sharp, oh, well, look, this is all we can do. Because there's things that are getting funded like that, and like, the $13.7 million to the Preterm Birth Alliance, that don't make sense for First Nations people when, First Nations women are, the highest cohort, of going into jail at the moment, because there's no funding to support those women to be able to live in community and to be able to gain access to services and, employment, education, housing. Like, we're not talking about extra. We're talking about fundamental human rights here. So is birthing. If we can't get funding for birthing and for Aboriginal women to have, culturally safe birthing practices in their own community, that's not a big ask, actually, Ainslie. That's pretty fundamental, and we've been looked over again.
That is CEO of South Coast Aboriginal Women's Health and Wellbeing Organisation Waminda, Faye Worner, speaking with the ABC's Ainslie Drewitt-Smith.